Welcome again to COMM 45, Communicating Leadership. By this point, you should have hopefully take a look at the syllabus, taken the syllabus quiz, and even done an activity at this point. So the activity that I'm hoping you did first was to quickly, before reading anything, maybe even stop this video right now if you haven't done it, to write a definition, less than 25 words, of just what you think leadership is. And you do need to post that to Blackboard. So take a minute. If you haven't done that, it's actually really important to me that you do that because I kind of want to know where you're at before I tell you what it is. So there's quite a few things for this first one, that activity. There is, of course, reading the chapter in the text, which is going to define not only leadership, but communication. And there's also another article on Blackboard about defining leadership by Rost that I want you to take a look at and read. And you can do that again after. And also there will be a discussion board post. So quite a bit to do here to start, but hopefully you can take a minute and give me that definition of what you think leadership is. There is no right or wrong answer. You simply get points for writing that. So of course, I don't think there is necessarily one answer, and most scholars would agree with me. So I'm going to summarize a few key findings here for you that you can definitely look at. These are the findings that you'll come up with from the Rost article. And leadership really is a new concept, was not defined for many, many years. And some of the definitions we've come up for leadership have been very simple and not really helpful in understanding the concept. And a lot of people think that leadership is just a bundle of traits. And we'll look at leadership, if you say defining leadership as the ability to lead, it's kind of redefining itself in its own words. So it was fairly complicated to say, what is leadership? And we're going to talk some more about that. Here are some scholarly definitions by decade of what people thought it was. Again, very early on, you have the trait-based, and we're going to talk about that. This is the notion that you're born a leader, that you cannot learn leadership. You either have it or you don't. The 40s looked at the ability to persuade someone. And we're going to take a look at that with some of our great leaders. You're going to post to the discussion board a great leader. They can be alive or dead. And I want you to tell me why you think they were a great leader. What did they do, or what did they stand for? Why were they considered a great leader? And a lot of leaders we think it's their ability to be able to persuade or influence. The 1950s looked a lot at the group emphasis. A lot of this actually came out of the Korean War, because we were looking at soldiers and their ability to be turned for the enemy, and some peer pressure and group concepts. So it really looked at the emphasis of leading a group of people. It wasn't until really the 60s we started looking at shared goals, that a leader and followers must have something in common, that there is a goal for both parties in the end result. In the 70s, we have a lot of groundbreaking research that's starting and beginning to happen, because at this point we have a lack of a definition. And some critical theories come out in the 70s, one of them being George McGregor Burns, who comes up with this notion of transactional versus transformational leadership. And that's going to be very critical moving forward into the 80s, 90s. But in the 2000s, we kind of take on now this very unique view of communication and leadership. And that is, leadership is communication. How can you separate the two? I don't believe that you can, because whether you're persuading, whether you are motivating, sharing goals with people, everything you do through leadership, it happens through the function of communication. Communication is how we lead, whether it's verbal or nonverbal. So we're going to focus on this very unique aspect of leadership, that leadership is a communication phenomenon. Without communication, you couldn't have leadership. So that's kind of the stance that Chapter 1 in your textbook takes, and we'll move over to leadership as communication. The book introduces you to some basics about communication that many of you may know. Certainly, it's the human communication process, how we use words and symbols and language to relate to people, to explain things to people, to persuade people. And we can manipulate those symbols. And what that simply means is we can manipulate our language if we want to make a used car sound much better than it is. We know what words to choose and how to manipulate the way we describe things. If you've ever been talked into something you didn't want to go to, for example, and oh, it'll be fun, it'll be great, there's going to be free food, and maybe there wasn't even free food. Maybe it was just an outright lie of manipulation to get you to do something. But these words enable us to communicate about the past, the present, the future, and we have a variety of ways we can achieve our goals through communication. Please take a look at Chapter 1 and review some of the processes of communication, the 3 forms of communication, action, interaction, and transaction. Some of these are old hats, so I didn't want to necessarily go over them again. They're things you probably got in your very early basic communication classes. So the definition of leadership that our textbook takes is one I very much like. It is human symbolic communication. That's how we engage in leadership. We have to communicate. And with that communication, we are modifying attitudes and behaviors of others in order to meet hopefully shared goals. Now, sometimes, again, what if all the leader is trying to do is to meet their own goals and not care about someone else's? I don't think we'd call them a great leader at that standpoint. Again, it has to be shared goals, that you care about the relationship of both. And you do that, you make relationships, you influence people all through the behavior of communication. So there's a couple of different assessments in your textbook. You have your willingness to communicate. You don't need to take that. And then your leadership communication style preferences inventory, which we're going to actually have on Chapter 2. So don't worry too much about that right now. That is the very quick introduction video, and we'll go ahead and stop there so that you can focus in on some of your activities and your leadership, famous leaders on the discussion board, as well as your definition. All right, that's it. Happy reading.